Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a deep dive into the world of college admissions.
I'm Mark Stucker, and I'm the founder and producer. Our mission is to make college knowledge available to all. We care deeply about your kid. We believe college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. We believe in being genuine and transparent. We are committed to covering a variety of topics, including the tough subjects. Thanks to your generosity, we're committed to providing a minimum of 10 hours of fresh, commercial-free content every month, with episodes every Monday and Thursday. We have a variety of co-hosts because we believe and value diverse perspectives. You're our listening family, and we get great joy every time we meet with you, as we do our best to give you tools so your students can soar and reach their limitless potential. Good afternoon, friends, and I just have to start out with a hearty thank you. Do you know that we have over 1,000 viewing hours on our YouTube channel? And I know we're starting out slow, but I think that's pretty good for 3 weeks. And I know a lot of the people that are over there are our podcast listeners because some of you are putting in the comments, regular podcast listener. That's the next thing to take it to the next level, is to really get our comment section going, because a lot of our co-hosts are actually prepared to come over and interact with you in your comments and, keep it respectful, positive, courteous. And that's how every single comment has been so far. But I'm also going to ask our thought leaders that I interview to come over and interact with our YouTube watchers when one of their videos goes up. So that's the next level. We do welcome comments. That's kind of a place for us to be a community and to communicate between episodes. I'm actually really excited about that. So if you watch a video, you have a thought, definitely share a comment. But thank you to the 1,000 viewing hours, whoever was involved in that. I know it's going to build up slow. We're over 600 and some subscribers already, but that's how this channel was, right? It started out with like 222 and you build up. So we're building a community over there. And just want to thanks for anybody who supported it. On today's episode, I'm actually going to play a comment from a great dedicated listener. I'll have a few thoughts. And then you're going to hear Hot Topics in the News. I know you thought it was done and we fired Hot Topics in the News, but no, Hot Topics in the News is back. Chris Tier joins me to talk about an article that was run in the Wall Street Journal on the fraud squad, which is Caltech's admissions team, and how they will go after anyone who embellishes their application. And by the way, I'm speaking to that author of that article on Monday from the Wall Street Journal. I'm going to see if he can come on the podcast to actually talk about it even more than Chris and I are going to talk. And he has to get clearance from media, but he's optimistic. So sometimes when I have that scenario, it can actually come up quite a bit where people want to come on, but they're kind of concerned. I always tell them this is pre-recorded, so it's not live. It's not like a webinar. I'm more than willing to send you the version of it after. And if you need to delete something or you need to clear it by the powers that be, I don't always talk about this, but a lot of the public schools we've had on here, I've had to do that. So anyway, Chris here will join me. That's going to be a two-parter. You hear part one today, and then part two, we start out on that article, and then we get into a debate. So you'll hear that next week, which is fun. It's a very friendly debate. It doesn't get too spirited. It's a good back and forth. It'd probably be a better term for it. And so that'll be next week. It's a two-parter. And then I am going to let you get a taste of YouTube. So you are going to hear an interview today that I did with New York Times bestselling author Bill Deresiewicz on his book, Excellent Sheep. And I'm doing that for a couple reasons. One, I want you to know that you can actually listen to YouTube as audio. And so I do it all the time. I'll play YouTube in the car. And so that's part of the reason. And the other reason is still a sizable portion of the audiences are different. So, I'm still trying to figure out what percentage of, the podcast listenership goes to YouTube and what percent of the YouTube listenership is exclusively over there. YouTube does have some tremendous analytics, but I'm still kind of learning how to read all the things over there. So, so that's what we've got lined up today. But without any further ado, I want to play this comment that came in from one of our devout listeners.
Hi, Mark. Just a quick little comment. I was listening or am listening to the August 5th, Your College Bound Kid podcast. And when you talk about Instagram, you say that we can follow you and you give the address, you say @ YCBK podcast. And you say it a few times like that, @ So when I got home, because I listened to it on my walk, I looked up @ YCBK and nothing came up. And I'm like, that's so weird. So I finally went on the website and I see that it is YCBK podcast. So I'm not sure why you're saying @ Do you mean at? I mean, I would just say to people, it's YCBK podcast. To me, it's incredibly confusing when you say, follow us, and you say @ YCBK podcast. I'm not sure if you're meaning to say at, but in that episode, it came across as @ and I kept thinking, oh, that's a weird name, and put in @ YCBK podcast. Anyhow, love everything you do. Listen to you and have listened to you for years. Thanks.
So I have a confession to make. You know, there's a saying that, and I'm going to butcher it, but it goes something like this. The older I get, the smarter I realize my parents were. And you're like, Stuck, where are you going with this? Well, my mom was an English teacher. And growing up as a kid, I wouldn't say that I was defiant, but I definitely wasn't compliant either. I was closer to oppositional than I was to compliant. I've told you stories before, at least once on here, how probably since age 6, my mom tried to get me to play piano lessons. And I won that war. Probably took until probably about 5th grade before she realized she was wasting her money because I didn't want to do it and I wasn't practicing. Not proud of that because I was just thinking, I could really know piano now if I wouldn't have been such a knucklehead. So you're like, where are you going with this stuff? So here's the deal. My mom used to always say, enunciate. Enunciate. And had I listened to her, I would have enunciated better. And I would have said @ YCBK podcast, not at. Or tell you the truth, I probably just could have said YCBK podcast. I'm talking about the Instagram channel. But it just would have been weird if I would have said, follow us, YCBK podcast. Feel like I'm missing something in there. We're talking about shift 2 on the keyboard. So anyway, I really appreciate this caller because I'm wondering how many other people did that. How many other people did I frustrate because they didn't listen to my mom and enunciate? Yeah, the older you get, the wiser you realize your parents were. So it should be shift, whatever you, those are named for that. Ampersand, I think. No, that's not. That's the 7. Shift 7 is ampersand. Anyway, I know there's a name for that little A with the circle around it. Sorry, guys. You see, I'm kind of challenged in some areas. That YCBK pod. You can also see like I'm a total Instagram rookie. Do you know that I never really used Instagram? I honestly didn't. I just started really with Instagram just now. I was kind of shocked to go on there and see like 1,300 and 80 followers or something. Because I really hadn't even been on Instagram. I maybe in my whole entire life, I bet I've been on Instagram for 30 minutes. I'm not kidding you. And I'm actually really enjoying it. There's like a lot of really good stuff over there. So anyway, you guys know I've got some deficiencies. I hardly watch movies. I don't go on Instagram. Never watch Seinfeld. All I do is like work and, have a few little hobbies. But I love my life. So thanks to this caller. And I'm going to say a few more comments about her point about because she walks, she hasn't been able to get to YouTube. So I'll say a few comments about that in a second. All right, friends, without any further ado, let's transition to our Hot Topics in the News with Chris Tier.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
YCBK friends, Chris here. Back. Hi, Chris.
Hello there, Mark.
Well, we promised you Chris would be back to talk about a Wall Street Journal article that a lot of you are blowing up my phone with, which, by the way, I say that affectionately because one of the best ways for me to know what people are talking about out there is when you send me articles and say, are you guys going to talk about this? I literally can use it as my pulse of what's resonating out there. And so I have to give the Wall Street Journal credit because they ran an article that you just can look at the title and you know just by looking at this title, okay, this thing's going to generate some buzz out there just from a standpoint of marketing, first of all. So the name of the article is called The Fraud Squad at Caltech Will Catch You If You Lie on Your Application. And there's a picture of Ashley Powley and the whole leadership team right on the cover there of the Wall Street Journal. And so, yeah, this is generating buzz amongst their co-hosts, amongst the parent community. And Chris, take this one to where you want to go.
It's just a shame that a great place like Caltech needs to form a fraud squad. But I was at a wonderful university last week talking about what they're seeing in this cycle. And this is a veteran I've known for a generation who's read so many applications. And we were talking with younger people in the office who happened to be there, and he was mentoring one of them. And some part of the conversation had to do with whether or not student writing was authentic in the personal statement, in the supplementary essays, and really sick to death of any width of AI and how veteran readers just have an intuitive sense of something that doesn't sound like a 17-year-old, even an extremely bright 17-year-old, and that you sort of follow your hunches and then you try to determine whether or not your concerns are valid. And Caltech is taking that approach and going the distance with it in terms of digging into the verification of awards, of activities, of things you said you've accomplished. They want to find out if there's anyone who can independently corroborate what you're reporting. And I've had, unfortunately, situations where I've had to have a student cancel an application because an agent had filled out most of it, and there was a lot of fraud in it, just misrepresentation of that. And by no means have I caught everything that anyone's ever been able to try to put by me. And, I admire Caltech, though I find it truly unfortunate that they need to do this. But I guess they've seen enough that they feel they need to do this. And I hope it sounds like in the article that they find in the vast majority of cases that they can, in fact, corroborate things. But there are those cases where it doesn't hold up to scrutiny. And, the use of AI, to brainstorm, to research, okay, fine. The use of AI to write something that is truly meant to be in your voice, from your, in the case of the personal statement, from your soul, from your real heart and your person. The idea that AI is going to be in there, it's artificial. It's not human. And, it's a shame they have to do it, but I understand why they feel they have to do it. And it'll be interesting to see if other institutions make clear that they're doing it. I mean, there could be, some type of a disincentive effect here. If you make really clear that you're doing this kind of thing, maybe it would inhibit some of the behavior that some of the students feel, is worth risking. And I'd be just don't take the risk. Report what you've actually done, write your own pieces, do them to the very best of your ability, and then pray to the deity of your belief system that it's going to break your way.
Yeah, well said. My initial reaction to this was that I was encouraged by this. Now, let me tell you why. By the way, I don't know if you want to call it a subtitle, but a caption above the article so if you were to read this article, it says the fraud squad at Caltech will catch you if you lie on your application. And then beneath that, it says college investigators vet every admitted student's application as schools nationwide battle AI-fueled cheating. Now, why would I be encouraged? Because I totally agree with Chris's point. It's kind of sad that they need to do this. I agree 100% with that point. Why would I be encouraged? The reason is one of the things I've heard, Chris, and I've heard it more in the last couple of years than I heard it previous years. How are they going to know if somebody cheats? And I'm talking about particularly embellishing extracurricular activities.
Yeah.
How are they going to know? And then normally, by the way, it's in the context of this guy cheated, blah, 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 blah. And they got in. Like that's usually how I hear the story, in the context of somebody who fabricated and got in and got pulled the wool over people's eyes.
Yeah.
And so your point that you brought up, I think is very salient, which is, could this be a disincentive? Is this all of a sudden, whoa, that's going on? I didn't know that was going on. Maybe I won't say that I was a national chess champion when I really just made it to the regionals.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so that's why it encouraged me. And, you know, I've often said this before. Colleges don't have the money to hire a private investigative team to research all the different things that are out there. One of the examples I oftentimes use when I'm talking about that is, we'll get in the weeds a little bit here, listeners, but our listenership can handle this. So if you apply for financial aid to a college and they take the CSS profile, the majority of the time they're going to ask for not only, well, if two parents are together, they're going to ask for that. But if it's a divorced, separated, or never married family, they're going to ask for that other person to submit their finances. And sometimes even the step person has to do it, and the biological, some at some schools. So you say, well, why are they doing that? Well, the easiest thing in the world to do would be to hide money and to say, oh, I'll just use dad in this example. Dad's just not willing to fill it out. And then like that spread, boy, be the biggest scam out there. Everybody with $500,000 income and up could just hide their money. And quite honestly, I've been around the block long enough to have seen people do that. Right. So it sounds cold when colleges say I need to see the other parent's finances, you know, but that's why they do it, because it'd be so easy to hide money. And then word would spread like, hey, I was going to have to pay $100K and now I'm getting Pell Grant money.
Yeah, it's just trying to be fair with regard to institutional resources and distributing them to primarily to people who need the money, right? And that there's merit money and somebody who wants a better deal but doesn't really need a better deal. But even at the best endowed places, it's reasonable for them to be trying to understand exactly what are the resources and verifications, corroborations. It's just, unfortunately, they are necessary at a certain point. Yeah,
and I just use it as an example because after spending 14 years at KIPP on the CBO side, you run into a lot of situations with non-traditional families where this feels really difficult. Like, I don't know who the person is. Or are they going to do that? It's really complicated, right? And it can feel really cold and hard-hearted to the families involved. Like, why are they saying they won't give me financial aid unless, you know, this other spouse fills this up and he's not going to do it? But the point is, I try to let them see from the school's perspective, they're trying to protect themselves from not getting scammed and obviously word could spread. This kind of reminds me of that, right? Like the school's trying to implement some quality control so that somebody doesn't fabricate extracurriculars and get in partly because they impress somebody with something that's a bunch of hogwash. Yeah. And so that's to me why, yeah. Now I do think Caltech is very unique in some ways. One, you have to know something about Caltech. They have like 950 kids around that in their whole undergraduate student body. Their class size is like 240. So they're dealing with small, and they also are high in endowment per student. So what that means is they have a lot of resources for a small number of spots. This is not something that would be easy for University of Michigan or Georgia Tech to implement something like the amount of resources and manpower it would take. So I don't think this is likely to be something you're going to see wide scale. But Chris, did you ever go through Harvard SECA when you were on the school side? Did you ever do that program or not? Is that one you ever did?
I did a Harvard summer program of some type in 2003.
That's what it would have been.
Yeah. What I was going to say, a couple of things, Mark, that I think you probably with KIPP, I certainly did in some of my schools, had to go to bat for families when I was absolutely convinced that the other parent was nowhere in the picture and had not been in the picture for the child's entire life or more than a decade. So there are times when counselors can corroborate it when it is, in fact, the truth of the matter.
Yep, absolutely. The reason why I asked you had been to Harvard SECA, so I went to Harvard SECA in 2019, and this was not long after Varsity Blues had broken out. One of my instructors is someone you either know or know of, Logan Powell, who's over the office at Brown.
Yep.
So Logan shared class with me, 12 people, how they were then implementing some significant quality control checks after the Varsity Blues. Now, mind you, Brown was one of the schools that also got caught up in it a little bit. So those schools, the Stanfords, the Browns, the USCs, like they really were under the microscope. But they were starting to do some spot checks. And he also said he talked about how complicated it is because other families sometimes or kids will blow the whistle on another kid.
Yeah. Dropping a dime.
Yeah.
Dropping a dime.
Do you know that this kid said they did this and didn't? And then it's like, do we investigate? Do we not? Said, well, Friends had a huge scandal like this in 2018, 2019, where parents and other students were blowing the whistle on people that got in and claiming it was, I don't want to go down that rabbit trail. But the point is, anything that can serve as a reminder to somebody, do I really want to do this? Because the whole thing could come down like a deck of cards and my acceptance could be rescinded. I'm kind of happy about it. And I know how difficult this is to do broad scale, wide scale because of the kind of resources. So those are my thoughts. Hey, Chris, I want to ask you a question. It's on a totally different topic, but I want to give you a heads up. It's not totally different, but I want to give you a heads up. So it kind of relates. So obviously, a lot of schools are dropping their, what I use the term custom prompts. Most people call them supplements, right? That's very noticeable for anybody in this business. And you turn out, you see no Georgia Tech and no UVA and no UNC, and the list goes on and on and on. I wanted to get your thoughts on why you think that's happening. So another reason I wanted to have this conversation with Chris is because there was an article Wall Street Journal ran not too long ago about schools dropping, what most people call their supplemental essays. You guys know I'm a little bit of a czar. I'm finicky on my language. I like to call them custom prompts or college-specific essays to elevate them to the status I feel they deserve. And there was an article not too long that was ran out about that. Chris was Chris was interviewed on that. They pick and choose what they'll put in there. Sometimes these people interview you and then you go look for yourself and you don't make you got dropped on the cutting floor. It's happened to me. It's happened to Chris.
I probably didn't say anything outrageous enough. So,
to make it, to get a click. So I want your take. We've been having this conversation recently. Why you think so many schools are dropping their custom prompts? Does that tie into this? Because AI, like I've focused our conversation here in the context of extracurriculars, but AI also can be writing, as we know. What are your thoughts on, because anyone who does what you and I do, you can't miss it. You'd be blind as a bat to not notice, whoa, bunch of schools that have had these prompts for years and kind of prided themselves on them and told you off the record or on the record they found them valuable. Now they're not doing them. So what are your thoughts? And does that relate to this topic at all with the Caltech and the fraud squad, in your opinion?
Yeah, having spent a good deal of time with my seniors in the past few days, helping them now look at the custom prompts, the additional writing, and the delight that some of them find, the smiles on their faces when they see there is no additional writing to do. My sense, talking with people at the university level, is that some of them truly believe that this will ease some of the stress and burden on the part of students. And it does. I think some of them are looking to generate more applications. So the easier it is to apply, logically, you would conclude that maybe more kids will apply if you're trying to build your applicant pool. I talked with admissions officers who at a certain point say, we just weren't learning enough from the additional writing that we found was absolutely essential to our making good decisions. And I'm always interested in comparing similar institutions that are doing different things. And next week, I'll be back at my alma mater, Amherst College, for a counselor program. And Amherst is very serious about its supplementary writing with different options and really sophisticated sorts of queries. Williams College, the arch rival, has no supplements. Wesleyan University, the third member of the so-called Little Three, has no supplements. And Amherst apparently believes they're really important. We're going to hold on to them because we learn things we need to know to make good decisions. Williams and Wesleyan say we don't need them to make good decisions. And different places with different practices. One thing that I experienced as the reader of applications, and one thing I have observed over time, is that as the application volume goes up, I don't see the staffing go up at the same rate. And I know there are part-time readers. I know colleges and universities bring in other people to help carry the reading load. But I got to believe that some of the admissions officers are thrilled they don't have to read more student writing and can just have a file that's already long enough, 35 pages perhaps, that they don't need it to be 40 pages long to figure out their recommendation on what to do with the applicant. So I think there are all sorts of different points of view on it, and some, I sometimes compare what we deal with in this work to, I don't make the rules, I just coach the players. And, I'm an old football and lacrosse player and coach, and sometimes the rules would change, and you learn the rules and you coach accordingly. And, when there's no shot clock in lacrosse and somebody could play stall ball the entire time, it was mad. That was the rule. But when they put in the shot clock, I thought it was a better game. I'm glad they did. So, you just, different places are going to have different practices, and you track them, and then you help your students adjust to the changing landscape as best as they can and apply in the most authentic and compelling ways possible.
This was really good. Hillary and I recently had a question on this. It hasn't even aired yet, so I know there's impossible for you to have heard it. And we explored some of the different reasons, and you hit on pretty much all the things we discussed, and then threw in another one, which is genuine concern for students' mental health. The question is that really motivating colleges, or is that what they say as far as a reason, right? I'm talking about the real reason, not what they might say, but it might be. It certainly could be for some. Here's another one that could be for some. Some schools were using, and Heather and I didn't talk about this, but I've been thinking about this since our conversation. Some schools legitimately were using this prompt to target underrepresented students not on their campus. And we know that because there were a lot of diversity questions. How will you add diversity in this kind of thing? And with the current administration really pushing back on DEI, I think it's quite possible that some schools thought, I'm not even going to go near that. That was part of the value. Does that resonate with you instinctively as a possible reason, maybe for some, when they think of all the reasons why they might move away from it?
Is it possible? Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, there's pressure, the scrutiny. Some people would just call it extortion out of Washington, to lean on places because the current administration wants no part of anything that has any resemblance to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And when you say, Chris, it's fair to say there were quite a few prompts that someone like you and I have been doing this stuff for decades. We could see a mile away that they're targeting that. I mean, some of them just come right out and say it. Like, how will you add diversity? Like, there was certainly quite a few prompts out there. That was one of the things they were trying to do, is to get a sense of how are you going to add a unique perspective. So that's why
which was fair game. And
yes,
Chief Justice Roberts' opinion,
yes,
he allowed for that type of writing to exist in the application. And a college friend of mine, who's a judge in New Hampshire, said that it had really come out of the oral arguments and the Ketanji Brown Jackson as a justice pressing the issue of the relevance of life experience for some applicants. And so, it got into the opinion and it's there, but that doesn't mean that the current administration is happy about it. And, some of the pressure we've seen brought to bear and some of the financial penalties, settlements, whatever, you can see why at a certain point you make a calculation to, let's just keep our heads down and not even get into asking the question that someone might not like.
Yeah, this has been really good because I thought Hilly and I had a very robust conversation, but I'm always thinking about these things. And I feel two more reasons surfaced in addition to all the ones that we said when we had this conversation here. One was, we can't say some schools aren't being authentic when they say we're concerned about student mental health. And that may not be reason number one, but maybe when you're looking at the pros and cons of everything, maybe it's primarily to get more apps, or maybe it's primarily to reduce the workload of your staff, or maybe it's one thing that hasn't come up here that did come up in the conversation with Hillary, kind of what the article talks about, which is one of the reasons I brought it up with you, which is, with all of this use of AI, we just don't think we're getting student work in the writing anyway. We're either getting something a parent has looked at, or AI's looked at, or quite honestly, someone like you and I have given feedback on.
That's I heard that too, and I left that out. That's absolutely, I have heard that too. And I think of Christoph Gutentag, who,
Sure.
Was for years at Duke doing a fabulous job. I mean, they de-emphasized the writing in the application. I don't know when that was, a couple of years ago, because of the doubt about the authenticity of it. And that wasn't even particularly tied to AI, as I recall. It was just too many kids had too many people helping them too much. So.
And we had him on the podcast, and he's explicitly said that on our podcast, if anyone wants to go back and listen to that interview. So that's not something in closed door conversations that he had. As far as the last reason we brought up, the, retribution, the administration not interpreting the Supreme Court decision the way it was meant to be interpreted. Several things. One, Julie J. Park, great YouTube up with her 16-minute deep dive. She's one of the lead counsel's consultants to Harvard, University of Maryland, professor on the Students versus SFFA case. You can see compelling, cogent argument to making the case for affirmative action and going into a whole deep history of that case and the history of affirmative action, walking us through everything from Bakke, to the two Michigan cases, to the Fisher case. That's up on YouTube if you're interested in that. It's been bashed a lot, and I felt like it needed to have an adherent make the positive case for it. And Julie J. Park is great. So if that's of interest to you, I'd encourage you to check out that YouTube. The other thing I wanted to say is, and I'm sure this has been Chris's experience because it's mine. Many schools have had conversations with me, people like Chris, our other co-hosts that are talking to schools all the time. And they have told us the fear of retribution and how it's impacted them. I'm thinking of a conversation I had with a private school, I'd say that's on the ascendancy right now, that said to me, we thought we'd be a little exempt from that because we're private and we're not public. Absolutely not. I'm thinking of another school that told me we'd love to do more diversity stuff, but we'd take a $12 million hit if they came after us, and we're just not in a place right now where we could afford that. So those just two of many examples. Like I've had many a school tell me that we can't afford to be at war with this administration, with the Department of Justice and all the powers that they have if they set their sights on us. Christina Lopez, of course, one of our co-hosts, just left Barnard. She's talked about this right on the air. So I just think that has to, at some level, be a reason. I do think most of the time schools do what's in their own self-interest, not because they have a Fortune 500 mindset, but they are trying to just enhance their position in the marketplace or even survive. So I think probably the primary reason would not be that. It's hard to know. For different schools, it could be different ones, right? For some, it could be primarily the fear of AI. For another one, it could be this workload is overwhelming us. For others, it could be all our competitors are doing this, and we know that you get more apps if you make the process easier, right? And then we've got the diversity argument, and we've got the mental health. So it's hard to read. We can't read the hearts of anybody. Different schools can do things for different reasons. I think most likely it's a combination of these reasons. And then the other point that both you and Hillary brought out as well, which is depending on the school you're at, and I think you're much more likely to experience this at moderately selective schools than a place like Amherst. You just don't always feel like you're getting enough, like, is there enough value add in the additional time that our readers have to read, work that we're making our listeners go through to do something which might also lead to us getting less applications? Is there enough of a value add? And then when you look,
I think if we call it a standardized test, it's, I think we've reached all of the above.
Yes, there you go. Awesome. Great discussion, Chris. Appreciate it. And hopefully you guys enjoyed. We hadn't done hot topics in the news in a while. This one went a little long, but hopefully you enjoyed this. I know we haven't had a hot topics in the news in a while, but we haven't forgot about them. I'm trying to make our Audible podcast a little shorter, seeing as we're now giving you 5 days a week of YouTube content. So you might have noticed most of these Audible podcasts have gone from 90 minutes down to an hour tops, but we still haven't forgot about our college spotlights, our hot topics in the news. And it's been a while since we've done one of these, and I thought this article warranted it. And I thought that looping in the writing piece actually made sense too, because most of where I took the conversation on the fraud squad argument was in the direction of extracurricular validation. But we know some of it is also writing collaboration. And in fact, you mentioned that right away in your lead. You led more with AI impacting writing, and I talked more about the extracurriculars when we know it's really both hand that Caltech's looking at.
Yeah.
Anything else, or you want to put a bow on this one? You think we wrapped it up?
On this particular topic, we can certainly put a bow on it.
All right, friends. This concludes part 1 of this topic. But Chris is back for part 2. And in part 2, we have kind of a little bit of a nice back and forth. I'm calling it a debate. It's pretty mild. It's pretty civil. It's about Kallenberg's book, Class Matters, Richard Kallenberg. But now let's transition to a brand new interview with New York Times bestselling author Bill Deresiewicz about his book, Excellent Sheep. It's a 2-parter, and the interview you are about to hear can also be seen at YouTube if you want all the visuals, if you want to read the body language, you want all the photos and graphs, and you want to see the manuscript on the stage and the music, then you can go to YouTube. But what I want you to see is that you don't have to watch YouTube. You can play YouTube as audio. I do it all the time in my car, and I listen to it. And I also wanted to show you this in response to the comment that came in from the listener who's listening to podcasts on a walk and feels like there's no time for YouTube. I want you to know that most Audible listeners are not going to YouTube also. They're not. So I thought this was content that was, I thought, pretty good. And I didn't want the Audible listeners to miss out on it. So without any further ado, let's transition to part 1 of 2, my interview with Bill Deresiewicz on his book, Excellent Sheep. I should say New York Times bestselling author Bill Deresiewicz.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
All right, friends, my interview with Bill Deresiewicz, New York Times bestselling author of Excellent Sheep and 4 other books as well. In part 1, Bill gives his backstory, and his transparency is at times riveting. Bill explains the circuitous path he took to get to where he is now. Bill explains his disenchantment as a professor at Yale University, and he explains the genesis of the book, Excellent Sheep. Bill explains what Yale students are great at and what they are lacking. I explain my experience with Bill's thesis, share some thoughts. Bill talks about career funneling. Bill explores the motivations for why students end up as sheep. And I challenge Bill. Bill, how can you say these students are not fulfilled? Listen and enjoy. Friends, this is a real treat for me. I'm here with Bill Deresiewicz. He is a New York Times bestselling author and a former professor at both Yale and Columbia, and a visionary, I'd say an agent of social change, and somebody who speaks truth to power. Welcome to the Your Cosmo Kid podcast, Bill.
Thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, we've been looking forward to this. Our listeners know I've mentioned your book, Excellent Sheep, at least 3 or 4 times. I had it as a recommended resource years ago. And I think that was just a very, very thought-provoking book that you wrote. And friends, we're going to talk about that book today, as well as a new book, well, new as in newer, that Bill has up called The End of Solitude. But before we get into that, take a few minutes, take 3, 4, 5 minutes and kind of tell us your backstory. It's always nice for our listeners to know the context from which you're going to speak.
Yeah, my backstory is very relevant because it's what led me to write Excellent Sheep in the first place. I grew up in a family that expected high achievement, immigrant parents. Dad was himself an Ivy League professor. The mandate for me and my brother was to be doctors. He became a doctor. I didn't really have an opportunity to think very carefully about what I wanted to be, partly because my dad taught at Columbia, so I knew that that's where I'd be going because, it was free. And because I didn't have to think about where I wanted to go, I didn't really have to think about why I wanted to go or what I wanted to do. And when I got to college, I think the enormous range of possibilities and the enormous freedom that college represented in terms of what I could study was actually quite terrifying to me because I had been raised in a way that was very prescriptive and was also, I think, very protective, almost infantilizing, really. So I seized very quickly when I got to college on a major that looked good. It was a joint major in biology and psychology, both of which I was interested in, before classes even started. And I came to regret that. I would say by the time I was halfway through college, after having taken lots of large science lectures and not much beyond Columbia's core, I realized that I loved literature and I knew I loved literature, but I'd never thought about whether that should influence my choice of major, let alone my career plans. And by about halfway through college, I thought, you know what? I really blew it. I should have been an English major, but it's too late now. And in retrospect, I came to feel like college was substantially wasted for me. I mean, the academic part, in a way that caused me a great deal of grief, actually. And I went out into the world. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with myself. And I grabbed at this thing, at that thing. I graduated in 1985, which means If you didn't know what you were supposed to do, you went to law school. So I did apply to law school, and I pulled back at the last minute, realizing that I didn't actually want to be a lawyer. Went to journalism school, knew that I was out of place. It was just a place to park myself. And then finally, 3-4 years after college, I said, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to study English Lit by hook or by crook. And I luckily managed to get into just one of the dozen programs I applied to. And I finally, for the first time in my life, at age 25, in grade 17, as you might explain it to a kindergartner, I actually liked school for the first time. I'd always been good at school, but I never liked it. I loved it, and I threw myself into it, and I went through the PhD program, and I started teaching, and I loved teaching, as I suspected I would, and I got the job at Yale. And for reasons we could talk about or not, at the other side of academia, the sort of research, producing papers, publish or perish thing, didn't really work for me. So I wasn't able to stay in academia, which was another great sorrow. But I continued to love teaching. I built close relationships with my students. I had long, unstructured conversations with them in office hours, which is regrettably unusual, especially at a place like Yale, when professors are very busy doing their own research. And I started to hear and I started to see what the system of elite education was doing to these wonderful kids who were very smart, very hardworking, very earnest, but had not been given the means to figure out what they wanted to do with their lives, much as I had not been given those means. And that's what led me to write Excellent Sheep, my experience with my students and their experience with the system. So that's my story.
I love it. Love it. So why don't you give us an overview of Excellent Sheep? Some of our listeners will have read it, some would not. The core theses of the book, how you came to develop that thesis. Yeah, just take us through that.
Sure. So the title kind of says it all, and it came from a student of mine. It was sort of a moment in seminar that it's not exactly clear to me where the thought came to her. It was kind of an intuitive leap, kind of a spark that flashed in her mind. And she said, "Are you saying that we're all just like really excellent sheep?" And you could see her kind of forming the thought as it came out of her mouth, this kind of moment of startled collective self-recognition. And I wasn't sure that I had been saying that, but I realized that I certainly thought it. And you just look at the two halves of that phrase. These students are excellent, which we have to understand in a very specific sense. I regret to say that they're not necessarily deeply intellectual or deeply creative. They are really great at doing what the grown-ups tell them they need to do to get the highest prizes that society has to offer. They are great at jumping through hoops and checking boxes and conforming and complying. And that is how you get into a place like Yale, unfortunately. So, and the more things they have to do as the sort of resume arms race has increased and increased and increased, the less able they are to do any of those things in a really deep way. And certainly in a way that comes from themselves, that's self-motivated. So it's the sport, we all know what it is. It's the sports and the musical instruments and the clubs and the academics and the service and the leadership, whatever those words mean. And as a result, many of them are sheep, meaning they only know how to follow the herd. They don't know what they want because they've only ever been doing what the grown-ups tell them to do. It's not about what they want. And I didn't arrive at these conclusions deductively. I didn't, sit down. I arrived at them through those long office hours conversations and also through seeing what happened to my students after they graduated. Some of them were aware of what I'm saying. Most of them weren't. They were just sort of showing me through their confusions, their uncertainties, their anxieties, what the system had done to them. When the same year that I left Yale and left academia, just sort of coincidentally, I published an essay where I talked about a lot of this called The Disadvantages of an Elite Education. And it came out in a literary quarterly with a fairly small circulation. I didn't expect too many people to see it, and I certainly didn't expect students to see it. This was 2008. But very quickly, and I mean within a few days, it started to circulate online. And I started to hear from students all around the country saying to me, "You have put my experience into words," or "You've said out loud what I've only been saying in private, in my own mind, or to my one best friend." And they also started to talk about something that I hadn't even been so aware of, which was how miserable this was all making them. And that was the next sort of milestone in the journey to writing the book, because I quickly realized that I needed to dig into this more. I needed to answer questions that students were asking me that I didn't have good answers to, like, what should I do? How should I deal with this? And that's what led to the book 6 years later.
So how long were you at Yale, Bill, before
10 years.
Sorry, no, before you started seeing these trends and observing, this is something that happened immediately or, more toward the end of your tenure, middle of your tenure? Like, where would you say
I think it was gradual. I don't remember it striking me immediately. And I had been a graduate instructor at Columbia, so but I don't think that I became aware of this until a few years later, but also not all at once. It was kind of a thing that I pieced together. And then I began to think about why that would be. Like, where did all this come from? I think I also didn't realize, I finished high school in 1981. The system was already in place, but the kids from my high school who got into selective colleges would have done like 3 APs and 3 extracurriculars. Sure. And it was only during my time at Yale that I started to realize that they were doing like 10 or 12 of each. Right. So that was a very important piece of information to help me make sense of why my students had come out the way they did.
Yeah, no, it's pretty, that's no doubt about it. What you're saying is absolutely spot on. And one of the reasons why the book resonated so much with me is it's been my experience as a counselor on multiple levels. So I can speak more recently, my best friend other than my brother, we grew up together, highly educated Princeton undergrad, Harvard Law. His daughter broke his heart by going to Yale. And then she's not at Yale very long. Someone who had always wanted to do medical research or either medical research or very involved in political consulting. She starts talking to her dad, my friend Dave, who was a co-host of this podcast for years, about either wanting to go to Wall Street or wanting to do management consulting. And he was like, where is this coming from? So there's a little snippet. I also, over the years, have followed up and done Zoom calls with my students who fit that profile and went off to Ivy League schools and all of a sudden went to Wall Street, and people that wanted to do all kinds of very different things before. I've seen it go both ways. I've seen some love it, but I've seen quite a few not like it, not like the grind, but feel like they're stuck because they start making a certain amount of money and get used to a certain lifestyle. And they feel like they can't go back either from a lifestyle standpoint or cachet standpoint. I've seen a fair number of that. Of course, I work with people. I work with people who are in those roles and who do love it. I don't want to be pejorative and make it sound like it's one size fits all. It's different strokes for different folks. We've had Evan Mandry on the podcast. And if you haven't met Evan, I feel like I'm very serious. Like I'll give you guys $100 to go have a lunch together, because Evan wrote the book Poison Ivy, How Elite Colleges Divide Us. And then came up, we've had him on twice. He also had an article in The Atlantic about how more than 50% of graduates of the most selective schools are now going into either management consulting, corporate law, or Wall Street. And what happened to engines of social mobility. And I just don't believe that more than 50% of people should go into those 3 professions. And he talks a lot about the system and how it forces you into conformity. So I've heard it from my students, from past students, from friends. Even now, I'm working with a client who to Stanford and felt sort of pressured into that role while Wall Street, got there and absolutely hated it, but felt like there were pressures within the system that were making her feel like that's what she needed to do. So tell me, what are those pressures? Where do they come from? And how are they so effective?
Right. So I should say, you made me realize that another thing that happened gradually while I was at Yale, right, was that my students would graduate. And especially because early on, you mostly teach freshmen, at least in my department. So it took a few years, right? And they would get to the end of college, not really know what they wanted to do. And then then I would see them a few years later. They're either floundering around or exactly what you just said. Finance, consulting, law, medicine was sort of a fourth. I would say that now, of course, the other big one is tech, right?
Sure.
And I'm not even sure that law is as important as it used to be. They call this career
medicine
funneling.
Has dropped off too.
And medicine has dropped off too.
Now look at medicine and say that I'm not making enough money.
That's exactly right. Tech has really distorted things even more as finance and consulting started to distort them a long time ago. They call this career funneling. These are the destinations that the herds are going to. It's a tremendous waste of our collective human capital and the resources we've put into these kids, but it's also like a waste of their own talents and, dare I say, lives, insofar as so many of them really don't feel fulfilled, don't feel like this is the right work for them. So how do they end up with that? How does a kid who's never heard of management consulting when they get to campus within a semester is already talking about how they need to, they're going to be a management consultant. And that means they need to get a certain internship before their senior year, which means they need to get a certain one before their junior year. And they're joining the consulting club. Like, this is a thing now. In fact, there are even rival consulting clubs at elite campuses. Well, social pressure, peer pressure. This is sort of the word around the campfire. This is what you need to do. But also a couple of other things. One of the things I realized about all of these fields, including law and medicine, insofar as you go from college to graduate school, is that the postgraduate work, especially in the first few years, there's a very striking resemblance to homework. It's just more homework, which means that somebody above you, somebody with authority over you, gives you a very hard but very well-defined problem that you go off and solve. It's a spreadsheet or it's a legal brief or whatever it is. So it's something that kids know how to do. Another thing, especially with consulting, this is even how the consultancies sell themselves, but also with some of the other fields, is that you continue to leave your options open, which when you're told that you can be anything you want, and to a certain extent you can be, maybe not anything you want, but a heck of a lot of things, if you're a really smart, high-achieving kid who goes to an elite school, you don't want to limit those options. You want to continue to dwell in a situation where you can do lots of different things. You want to delay that moment of decision. And I think you especially want to delay it. And this is sort of back to what I was saying before, and maybe the biggest piece. If there's no internal motivation, if there's nothing that's driving you because you have discovered, I hate to use the word passion or even purpose, just because they've become cliches, but some inner sense, some inner compass that's pointing you in a direction that grows out of your, dare I say, innate or early developed desires. What do you like to do? What do you think needs to be done? Like, if you've spent your entire life from middle school or even earlier just doing what the grown-ups want, you've never had a chance to figure that out. And so therefore, there's no possibility of translating that into some kind of career path. So you just grab at what's being offered to you. And if it's lucrative and high status and there's peer pressure heading in, and these firms have a lot of money and they come to campus to recruit in ways that other sectors, NGOs don't have the money to. Sometimes they even pay the schools for access to their students. That's what you're going to do.
Have you put in any thought on decoupling is the word that comes to mind. Maybe that's not the best word, but assessing is probably a better word. Whether it's mostly about status or it's more about, for lack of a better word, the baller lifestyle without being in the NBA, right? These can be 7-figure paths. They really can. Not for everybody, but these are professions that can set you up for a 7-figure income. So thought about that at all? Whether it's just, I want to have a certain kind of lifestyle and that's what I want to do because I want to make bank versus, this is the top of the pecking order status.
I wouldn't be in a position to know that, but people have studied that. Even undergraduates have studied that. A few people, and they've sent me their work, right? Sometimes they'll interview me in the course of their work. And what they will tend to say is that it's less about being wealthy per se, although wealth is especially, certainly linked with status.
Sure.
And it has more to do with the things that I've been talking about, this desire not to limit your options, this lack of kind of an internal drive in another direction, and this kind of, I'm not even sure if peer pressure is exactly the right term because no one's pressuring you exactly, although if you major in anthropology or English, your friends might make fun of you, which is kind of sad. It's just the norm. It's just like what you're supposed to do. No one person or any number of people is actually pressuring you to do it. It's just the culture. It's just what you do. Like I said, you come to campus and within a semester, this has become your desire, just like your friend's daughter, right? How did she end up? It's like you get the word on the street. This is what. Yeah.
So I can see somebody out there, and I can even think some of my clients that I work with who are in these fields and who love the work, thinking, like, just to play devil's advocate. So what makes you so convinced people aren't fulfilled? Maybe they love doing this is what they love doing. And so you found your thing. We went back and did English literature. This is, people have found what they love to do. And sure, it's high paying and it has status and it comes with a lot of societal perks, but they found what they love. Like, what's the evidence that you have that no, it's something more than that?
Right. So first of all, I think I started writing Excellent Sheep with the attitude that I would tell students to do this set of things and not this set of things. And I realized, no, that's actually wrong. And that's not actually what the issue is. It's not about what choice you make. If you make a choice to go into finance to Wall Street and you have good reasons to do it, or you find the work fulfilling, I don't have a problem with that. I'm concerned with how people make the choice. Are they making it just because they're going along with the herd, just because they can't think of anything else to do? Or is it coming from some genuine interest in the work and sense that the work is satisfying? I think it's pretty clear that overwhelmingly they're doing it because that's what you do and that's what you've been, and you can't think of anything better. I mean, first of all, let's ask ourselves, how many people would do that work if they weren't getting paid a lot of money? How many people really enjoy their economics major, or is it just the thing that they know they're supposed to do, or their computer science major? And then there's the anecdotal evidence. I also had students come back and say, I'm really miserable, but I've gotten addicted to the money, or I'm miserable and I just sit there thinking about my next vacation. I also think there have been studies. I haven't seen anything about consulting, but I think there have been surveys of people in finance and in law and in medicine, and they're not happy. There are very high rates of depression, divorce, drug addiction, and just people saying that they are not happy with it.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing to talk about because, I work with a lot of lawyers and a lot of doctors. I just do a lot of double doctors, double lawyers, double dentists, because at that age, that's when you meet somebody a lot of times and you have something in common. So they get married. And there certainly are, some that are very fulfilled, especially in the doctor profession, although a lot of changes going on now with managed care and, the corporatization. I'd say a much higher level of frustration now than a decade ago or 15 years ago with the changes. But just literally last week, I was talking to a doctor in Texas who said, I absolutely love what I do. So I slept 3 hours last night, which is crazy, but it's because I love what I do. I just love it. I love it. So it's hard sometimes when you talk about this because, you have to be able to capture the nuance, right? There are people, and certainly I'd say I have a sizable number of attorneys that are not happy, but I also have a sizable number that are very, very happy and love what they do. So, it's tricky sort of communicating to strike that balance between we're not saying that these professions are bad. There's also another person that says, it's because I make what I make that I'm able to support the philanthropic causes that I support, and I get great joy out of supporting the philanthropic causes that I support. And so I just want to make sure that we're talking about all angles of this thing. All right, friends, that concludes part 1 of my interview with Bill Deresiewicz on his book, Excellent Sheep. Hope you join us next week for the final part. Friends, we are in year 9 of our podcast, but July 21st, 2026 was the most important day of our podcast history. On July 21st, we launched a brand new yourcollegeboundkid.com website. As soon as an episode goes live, you can now listen on yourcollegeboundkid.com instantaneously. And as soon as a YouTube video goes live, it is up on the new website. The website is cleaner. Interviews and the spotlights and past episodes are so much easier to navigate. Special shout out to a brother-sister team, Mary LaChance in Connecticut and John Rooney in New York, who, by the way, are volunteering their services to help us make college knowledge available to all and being our webmasters. You have to check out the new yourcollegeboundkid.com. The feedback so far on the new website has been off the charts. Effusive. Another thing happened on July 21st. We went from a Monday, Thursday, Audible podcast to a daily podcast. We now have YouTube videos that drop every Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. That is every day we don't have an Audible podcast. Most of these videos are between 10 to 20 minutes, but every 6 videos, a long-form video, a deep dive with a thought leader in admissions or higher ed. Our Your College Bound Kid podcast YouTube channel is more than just a place to learn. It's a community forum, and we can use that comment section on YouTube to interact with each other and strengthen our bonds in our community. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Stuck, you're killing me. I love the pod, but 7 days a week? Are you serious? Thanks to Sony Patel from Kansas City, every one of those 5 days we drop a new YouTube video, she will send out a video trailer on Instagram that will preview the YouTube video that went live earlier that day. So you can take 60 seconds to watch the Instagram video trailer, and then you can decide if the 10 to 20 minute YouTube video is worth your time. Now, if you're not signed up for our Instagram, it's just at YCBK Podcast. That's at YCBK Podcast. One more time, that's at YCBK Podcast. We are excited and we look forward to interacting with you, our listening family, in the comment section on YouTube. All right, friends. Next week, well, here I go. I'm really having a hard time with this. I do like this idea of doing sequential podcasts, by the way. I'm sold on it now. Part 1 should go Monday to Thursday, not next Monday. And I'm so sold on this that I have a lengthy interview coming up. I think you guys are going to like it. I did it yesterday. I talked to Rick Barth for 2 hours and 10 minutes. He's the director of undergraduate admissions at Clemson. Shout out to Carolyn Wood, by the way, who booked that appointment for me. Yeah, I've got some fantastic people that are booking appointments. Carolyn booked this one for me. And I decided to take a little bit different approach in that interview. First of all, I always do this when I get on. I say, what's your hard stop? Because I have to respect people's time, right? And when they say this is really dangerous to say to me. What Rick said to me, I don't have a hard stop. Like, if people knew how garrulous I was, they would not say I don't have a hard stop. But yeah, he said I don't have a hard stop. So I'm like, okay, this is going to be good. So I did something a little different in this interview, with Rick. I decided to mostly focus on how Clemson makes admissions decisions. So the whole interview went about an hour 55. I've already edited it. I've edited it down to an hour 40. And then we talked afterward for like another 10 or 15 minutes. And I spent over an hour talking about how Clemson makes admissions decisions. And so I would love some feedback from listeners to know if they like that approach to an interview. Because normally, I'll spend so much more time talking about the culture, the programs, and then I maybe take, 10 or 15 minutes on admissions. But this, I think of an hour and 40-minute interview. I think an hour 5 is literally on how Clemson makes admissions decisions. So I probably should tell you this, a week from now, because, you guys are hearing this today. You'll hear Bill Deresiewicz part 1 today. You've already heard it, actually, and you'll hear part 2 on Monday. And then it'll be next Thursday that you're going to hear the Clemson interview. And it's also one of the ones that I'm going to put up on YouTube. So I'm still trying to figure that piece out. Like, when do I run something exclusively on YouTube versus exclusively on the Audible podcast? I'm still trying to work through that. But that Clemson interview I'm putting up on both places. But it's not going to go up on YouTube until late September. Sometimes they go first on YouTube and then go over here, and then sometimes they go over here first and then over there. So anyway, yeah. So next week, it's pretty simple. Sorry, here I go again. Next episode, it's pretty simple. You'll hear part 2, of the article Chris and I are talking about the fraud squad. And, but it's mostly really a good back and forth conversation about Richard Kallenberg's book and his philosophy. It's really mostly that. And then you'll hear the final part of Bill Deresiewicz. So, yeah, that's what we've got for you next week. And friends, I want to leave you with a thought. And if you've ever emailed me, if I've ever emailed you, you see this at the bottom of all my emails. And it's simply this: your attitude, not your aptitude, will determine your altitude. In other words, your attitude, not how smart you are, will determine how high you'll soar. And you know what? I actually enunciated that time, I think. I'd have made my mom proud. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about YCBK on social media. And you help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating at yourcollegeboundkid.com and clicking the donate button. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. If you have a question or suggestion, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak, and we will do our best to get your question or your comment in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I'm the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admission and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, 2 admission officers from Colorado, Hillary Dickman from Colorado College, Kate Strickland from CU Boulder, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, Heath Einstein, the Chief Enrollment Officer at TCU in Fort Worth, Carter DeLauro, a co-director of college counseling in New York, and Christina Lopez, the former Dean of Admission at Barnard College, and our international college specialist, Kevin Newton from Dallas, Texas. Our stupendous sound engineer who makes everything happen is Nemanja Matvic from Serbia. Our reliable webmaster is John Rooney. Website updates are done by Joy Stucker. Image editing by Vlad Honchar. And what would we do without our volunteers? Guy Pillsbury, Sony Patel, and Andy Bernstein are all helping us with podcast marketing. Carolyn Wood, Mark Doniger, and Carrie Roberts book interviews with thought leaders. Amanda Dugan, Colleen Sinoki, Nicole Resch, Trevor Smith, Ryan Stepler, and Lynn Labash send thank yous to interviewees. If you want a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegebounkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly newsletter, YCBK Plus, it's also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights and our upcoming events and receptions. And you can now do searches for past content by using our new Explore and Topics tabs. We really encourage you to explore our past content. We have close to 1,000 hours. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.